Thanks everybody for also being here and participating with us in this event. Right now, security is actually a very, very important topic for for all companies, but not only on specific industries, but as well on many different scenarios. And it's basically because the data that you're holding is considered right nowadays one of your most valuable assets. But at the same time, there's a lot of restrictions into how you should be able to use that data, and that's why also regulations have been in place to be able to cover those requirements. So today we wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we see on the market. So Informatica has been in this space for many, many years now. You heard this morning talking about BitNet and how they are protecting their own data for their non-production environments, but we also see that those threats are coming from different scenarios and from different ways into your company, and that's what we wanted to talk to you about. So today, it's not really common to see many news about, across Europe, to see news about data breaches. But every day, those are happening. And unfortunately now, it's not a matter of if you're going to be breached, it's a matter of when you're going to be breached. Now, one of the key objectives of Informatica is actually trying to help our customers avoid these type of headlines, right? We just recently heard about Madison, which is one great example of really having your own data, your client data, being completely exposed. We see it even on a thread that it's not only related to, for sure, I mean, credit card data or even email addresses that companies can use for certain points, but what Madison also revealed is that there are certain scenarios in certain countries like Saudi Arabia where actually adultery is punishable by death. So can you imagine the kind of threat that imposes even to your personal safety? Now, every one of us in our companies, we hold lots of volumes of data. And now with the exploding volumes that we have, we saw it today talking about CDR data, everything that we post on Facebook or LinkedIn or any of those websites as well is actually being considered. What we see also here in these kind of scenarios is that it goes across many different industries. So you have your social networks, you also have telco companies like Orange or TalkTalk in the UK, then you have financial services, even big names like HSBC, being breached. What we also know is that it's becoming more and more profitable for hackers to get a hold of customer data and sell it. One scenario that we see that sell is what is called the dark web or the deep web. Is those websites where the data is exposed and actually there's trading of that information, and it really reaches and proliferates quite quickly once the data is out. So we want to help you avoid those scenarios. And that's what we see also, that those attacks are escalating. Those attacks are now being exposed. One major change that the European regulation has had in terms of data protection, specifically for telco companies, is that now we have to notify when those breaches are happening, okay? And we have to do that because those lists of data, either patient data or customer data, or even phone records, are actually being misused by many scenarios. And what we see also is that threat is coming both from the outside as well from the inside. So what that also means is that now security is one of the top priorities of IT. And this is something that we need to understand and that we need to really get a hold of what we're doing there. The risk that we're trying to assess actually gives us a sense of just by exposing 12 fields, like the ones that are listed here like your name, your birth dates, your license plate numbers, is actually a great risk. And these are just 12 of them. And I'm sure that you're holding even more data from your customers, right? Right now, Informatica is also on the space of helping you with your total customer relationship. So even our solutions, our master data management solutions, become a highly critical system and highly sensitive, because that's where you're holding all your master records from your customers. So that even imposes a great risk. So the problem that we have with this is that also the data is being moved around to many environments. And we know about it because we do the data integration. So we know how you're moving the data across your organizations as well. So where is that data? How do we know exactly who is using that information, and why are they accessing that information for a given point? So when we talk about this breach and when we talk about that exposure of data, right now you can see that it's not only about where the data is located, but also which data is critical for which projects. I mean, should we do full-size copies of the data for a development that is specific to a given product in your organization, or a given marketing offer for your organization? Why would you need your whole CRM data just to cover a small subset of that information? How are you protecting the data right now, and what level is necessary? We have customers that, once we start these kind of projects, they give us a list and they prioritize, by different levels of security that you need to apply to the data. But at the same time, how do you do that for all your environments and for all your data? So you see, right now we're not talking about specifics. We're not talking about Oracle or Teradata or Hadoop. We're talking about the data itself. And because we know it's going to move, and because we know that you have many different sources that are really being populated with this data, we need to understand what are those threats. What happens with outsiders, right? So you have certain breaches, like Ashley Madison, that does talk about a hacking scenario, right? You have an attack from the outside trying to get to your networks, and you can see also that your existing solutions for security are probably not enough. When actually, once they penetrate your surface, then basically we need to, they're open to see any kind of data. But also, what happens with insiders? What happens with people that have access, external resources or internal resources that have access to your production data, either from a call center, people that are on the phone with their customers, that they actually need access to the data, but they don't need to see a credit card number, right? Or what happens with the DBA or a developer or a tester in a non-production environment as well? There is nothing in the role description of a DBA that says that they actually need to look at their data. They should be able to do any of their management scenarios to be able to manage your database itself, but they don't need to look at your credit card number, the credit card numbers of any of your customers. They don't need to look at where they live, right? So those are the kind of threats that we see, and that sometimes they get neglected just by thinking that you have a firewall and that's enough, right? So those risks, what we see right now is that, traditional architectures are really not sufficient now to protect the data. So we are able to protect the boundaries, and we are able to protect, the networks and everything. But once they reach the database, it's all exposed. Now, if you remember from Alistair's presentation, you can see that evolution of technology is actually quite true as well for the level of risk that we have currently for your sensitive data. So imagine in your systems, in your companies, having all the different scenarios that come from the mainframe to the Hadoops, right? So you are moving this data, and that also means that the level of exposure that we have is actually quite escalating. And also, we don't really necessarily need, what we're trying to do is actually help you reduce what is the attack surface, where actually people do have access to the data, and how you're able to reduce that there. But of course, with these volumes and the exposure to different technologies there, it becomes quite difficult to do. What we also know is insiders, right? Insiders is people, either DBAs, which, do have access to all your systems, all your data most of the time, but you also have your own developers and testers there. So, we're one of our customers, speaking to him about our different his different business needs. One of the things he said is like, I need to protect even our own teams, so they cannot do anything wrong with the data, right? So in this case, what we're saying, I'm sure, there are many developers here, there are many testers here, and I've been also a developer and a tester, and I always ask for all the data, all the production data. I needed it all, right? Just to cover every possible scenario that I needed for that space. What that also meant, right, is that usually companies have 8 to 12 different copies, for full production copies of data in their different environments. Just by thinking on development and test environments, you would have the developer, you would have the test, the system integration, the user acceptance test, the pre-production environment or near production environment, and your production environment. Just right now, we've listed 6. And I'm sure that in your companies you have even more. But it's not only what is being copied for your non-production environments, it's also what's needed in your production scenarios. What we also see is like regulations. So Croatia, now being part of the European Union, one of the things that is going to be really enforced is security. The European Union is doing a lot of changes to their Data Protection Act, one of which has been already approved, and it's basically saying that the fines that would be applied, the fines that could be applied to any company with a breach can go up to 2% of your global turnover. So for companies like in the Adriatic region that cover different countries, that amount of money is actually quite significant. Now, that is not intended to ruin, let's say, European companies. That is intended to understand what is the level of security and the level of risk that happens when you are dealing with customer data. And it's also applied to companies that are outside of the European Union that are doing business transactions and that carry on, that need to safeguard the data that they're using. So just in this example, and you can see that not only the European Data Protection Act, which is going to be imposed as well here, is in place. We also have specifics for different industries, like the financial services one. So we see if you're holding, and not necessarily you have to be in the financial services vertical, but if you're holding any type of credit card data, the payment card industry regulation actually applies to any of you. So you need to protect the information, your personal account numbers, how you're dealing with that information, and you're supposed to not keep track of everything that is there. But if you have any type of transactions where you have a recurring invoice for a customer, you would be holding any kind of account information for that purpose. Or you have a specific, so if you have in any way information that is related to U.S. companies as well, or any kind of trading there, you are obliged to also comply with many of their own regulations. And of course, when you have things like SEPA as well, applied as well to any of your companies here in Croatia, would also need to be there. The telco regulation, actually for the European, was the first one that meant or stated that we had to notify when that breach was happening. But you can see that this does apply to any of you, okay, in that scenario. Now, what can we do, right? How can we help you on this? So for us, there are two main scenarios where that happen, that needs to be done. So the first one is, how do you protect your production data? What happens to your CRM systems, to your call centers, to your ERP scenario? So usually you would have user access, but we also understand that there is a point where not only user access is done, but you have to understand what is the data that is being held there. And that data usually can cover even VIP customers. So there, even in one single database, you might have a different priority in terms of the data that you're using. What happens in your test environment? So how are we looking to provide testers with the right data that they need, but at the same time, not making it production or real data? And of course, you also have many data that is being exposed or sent out to third-party companies. You know, it's very common right now that you can do even customer profiling with a third-party company. How do you protect that information? You know, from once you give it out, it's out, right? So how do you do that? So our topic today is basically that. How can you be regulation ready? So with Informatica, and we've heard this morning BibNet talk about the different solutions that they're using, both in big data and also in test data management. Within Informatica, we have two approaches. And the first, basically, because of the nature itself of the data. So in production environments, our approach is what we call dynamic data masking. So that means that the data is actually masked on the fly. So once a query is done against a system, we will verify, intercept that query, and understand if actually that query is okay to be served for that specific user. Okay? So it is a role-based authentication method in which we are able to protect the data that is being actually presented on a screen. Okay? So that's our approach in production. And it's that way because we actually can't touch production data, right? It is production. So how can we protect it in another way? Now, for non-production environments, for us, it's very important to cover another scenario. So regulation is telling us is that, you know, the access to data needs to be on a need-to-know basis, right? But why would a developer need to know a credit card number or an email address from a specific customer? Why? In which scenario is he going to use that information? So for that approach, what we understand is basically we can mask the data in a way that we actually, instead of having real data, we can have realistic data. So if we construct an email, it will have the same structure of an email, but it will not be one that actually exists for your scenarios. Okay? So that is the overall approach. Now we go a little bit further than that, right? So in terms of protecting the data, we have two scenarios, dynamic and persistent data masking. And again, because of the use that we're going to give to the data. But we also can help you understand where is your sensitive data located. And that's what we call the discovery process. It is very important right now because of the same idea of proliferation that we have currently. You have to be able to expand and see exactly which tables are containing that information, okay? Regardless, again, of the platform that you have underneath. We can also help you reduce the volumes that are being copied to your non-production environments, and that's a way that we do through what we call subsetting. So again, if you are testing a new development or a development for a specific functionality, why would you need the whole data set? Now, the master data and everything gets copied anyway, but the transactional data is what you really want to reduce, and that's where the volumes are actually exploding. And then, of course, after we do all this process, we are doing it as well. And at some point, there will be audits in your company. There will be a way to check that those controls are being applied. So within our own solutions, we are able to help you prove that the movement of the data that you're using is correct, that the data is actually being protected and masked accordingly, both in your production and your non-production environments, and help you also give out those reports that tell you that the information is actually being protected. Okay? So again, the two approaches that we have, persistent data masking, as we say, it's data that is written already masked for your non-production environments, and dynamic data masking, that it's only masked when it's being presented on your different screens. So the overall idea as well with persistent data masking is that you're able to mask the data consistently across different platforms. Why? Because we also understand that your systems, your CRM system is not a standalone, or your SAP system is not a standalone. You have your CRMs, you have your data warehouses, you have your ERPs, everything is connected at some point. Now, when you're masking the data, you can't really mask it the same, different ways in all your different systems, because with those integrations, what would happen is that when you're actually looking up for current information, it doesn't have any record associated to that. So our idea with persistent data masking is that you are able to do that consistently. So the consistently, repeatable, and what we call deterministic. So that means that if you have the same input in any of your systems, you will have the same output for them, and that you can also do it repeatable. So also testers can become very familiar with the test data they have, because it will be the same kind of data all the time. Now, when we talk about persistent data masking, it is also very important to understand that there's no way of going back to the original value. So that is a way that is very irreversible as well, and that's the way that we can protect your systems. So keep in mind that it is also, and that's where our customers really need this kind of approach to be able to do it consistently across many platforms. And when we talk about masking, right, we talk about different scenarios of doing replacement or shuffling, and we have many techniques and advanced techniques to be able to cover those. For example, if we're changing names to different names, we want to use a dictionary of Croatian names. We don't want to use James or John or Jane, right? We want to use Croatian names. But at the same time, we have to understand things like gender, right? Because you don't want to change a female to a male name as well, right? So those scenarios need to be considered, and that's why also the business rules that are applied to the masking are also very important. For example, if an insurance company, right, when you calculate your policies, if you change my gender, if you change my age, right, that means that basically the calculations of those policies will be completely different than the actual production system. So you have to consider things like, well, yes, I'm going to change a birthday, but I'm going to change maybe a day or two from that actual year. Or I'll keep it in the same month, so I know that the calculations will be pretty much the same. But at the same time, I'm providing the testers with realistic data, right? Because it's still a valid name, it's still a good birthday, it's still a gender that they need, but it's not your production data, right? So in this scenario, you can say, well, Michael Schumacher will be now Valentino Rossi. So you can play with those scenarios, and you can use many techniques, right? We have things like bank account numbers, and we have dictionaries of names, streets, addresses, and all those different scenarios that we have. For example, for telco companies, one big scenario is how to protect your MSISDN number, right? And we have to know the structure of it so we can change it accordingly, right? Or the credit card number that we want to keep the first 6 digits, including the control digit, and then just replace the rest, because testers need to see if it's a Visa, Master, or an Amex card that they're using and that they're validating against, okay? So when it comes to masking, that's what we are able to do, and apply all those business rules to the way that you're changing the information, okay? Now, as you remember, in the first slides for persistent data masking, we saw that all the different systems were masked the same way. Now, in production environments and with dynamic data masking, the approach is a little bit different. And it's different because we will mask the data according to your business role, okay? Your user role, and who is actually accessing that information. So that means that if you have an authorized user that is actually connecting through the right application with the right level of access and everything, we don't do anything there. We don't want to apply anything there. But if you have a person from a call center, right, you might want to let him see parts of the name because he needs to authenticate the person that is calling him, right? But at the same time, he doesn't need to see, for example, his complete national ID. Most of the times when I call my telco operator, they ask me, what's the last 4 digits of your ID number? That's all they need, and that's all they have. And that is actually the right way to do it, right? So, because of course with my national ID, having a national ID number, you have basically all the information from a specific customer. But also we have people that are on your data warehouses, right? We're talking about different systems. We're talking about ERP, we're talking about a CRM, but what about your data warehouses? In your data warehouses, you have large volumes of data in one single system, and you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of users connecting and creating different reports in that scenario. So I will tell you an example from one of our customers. This happened, this is a triple play company, a cable company, that actually they had in their data warehouse all the information about the customer records on the movies that particular customer client was watching. So what happened in that scenario, and this was in a European country, what happened in that scenario was that one of the analysts from the data warehouse, he thought it was really funny to look at a former president's movies, right? Which ones he was looking at, okay? And of course, he only found Disney Channel movies there. And what he did was actually send it out to his friends, right, in the company. Of course, everybody thought it was funny at some point, but that email actually reached the security teams, and then they said, well, you know what? You are allowed to see the data, but this is not the use that we want you to have of it. And of course, that's why they actually use now dynamic data masking for that specific purpose. And again, regardless of the platform that we have, and regardless of the way that the applications are being connected. So again, you have your reports, you have your development tools, you have your Oracle Enterprise Manager, you have your Java applications. All that scenarios can be protected with our approach. Okay, so on the part of our secure testing, and just to cover and recap on what we're talking today, again, for us, it is very important to be able to secure your environments and help you into an approach that will make it a repeatable process as well within your organizations. So when it comes to secure testing, our goal basically is to help you improve your own productivity of your test environments, getting you to be able to refresh the data that you're using in your non-production environments with a much faster rate. We know because of the way that customers are looking at those developments, usually the refresh of an environment, of non-production environments, takes it's basically once or twice a year. But developers and testers are testing every day. So at some point, you actually run out of data. So as I was mentioning, for us, it is a much more complete scenario that we see for the testing side. So we have, what we call the discovery, which is understanding where the sensitive data is. We have the persistent data masking, a scenario where we actually protect that data. We have the subsetting in order to reduce the volumes that you're copying and giving you the optimal test data set that you need for a specific test. We are also helping you create new test data for those developments that actually don't have production data. That is very common as well. And it's also a way to help our customers with their own time to market, right? If you test faster, you are able to launch new products faster, and that's one of the areas that you might need, again, to generate the data. So I have an example here. Actually, it's a company from Austria, but that has global scale, and they talked to me specifically about a case in Russia where basically the amount of transactions that they do within the European Union is a huge volume that they do. But then they have other scenarios like Russia where those type of transactions are really small. So for them to correctly test, they actually need to populate as if Russia had the same volume of transactions that they would in the rest of the system. So it is important as well to cover any of the scenarios that you might have with new functionality. And of course, being able to validate that scenario. Another thing that we've just added to this offering is what we call the test data warehouse. So it's a way to version and in a way to also keep those test data sets that we already have, and being able to refresh those environments as soon as the testers run out of their good data. So today we've heard, I think there's no better point than when a customer makes it for you. And today BibNet actually did deliver us as one of our great examples here within your company. But when it comes to protecting the data, most of our customers, what they understand that we can provide is really a very quick time to value, a very safe way of really understanding what are the different threats that you have within your company, and also being able to comply and help you understand how you are able to see all that sensitive data across your different platforms. And that is basically something that is very common for our customers. We've been leaders 3 years in a row in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for data masking as well, both covering persistent data masking and dynamic data masking, because actually we are the first ones that really launch that kind of a scenario. So for us today, what we wanted to share with you is that you can be regulation ready, that you can use Informatica solutions, that we know where your data is, and that we are able to protect that in order to improve your own productivity, your time to market in terms of new functionalities that you need for your developments, reduce the actual risk of the data breach that you might have, because we are reducing the exposure of production data and reducing the attack surface that we call. And of course, being able to help you to lower the cost as well by giving you the right data at the right time and with the right volumes that you need. So thank you very much. Any questions?